increase in fuel prices and the continuing rise in food prices as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Renewed fighting scuttles 5-month-old Ethiopia ceasefire. Malawi gives refugees 90 days to relocate to a refugee camp. Ghana says 23,495 Ghanaians tested positive for HIV between January and June this year. Vote counting is underway in Angola following Wednesday's parliamentary and presidential election.
The law here says that the final results need to be released up to 15 days. It can be sooner, but it cannot be later than that.
And Nigeria integrates rotavirus vaccine into national vaccination programs. Those stories and more are coming up on Daybreak Africa. South African workers are holding protests nationwide against the rising cost of living. The protests are taking place as South Africa hits its highest rate of inflation since 2009. Vicky Stark reports from Cape Town, South Africa.
Thousands of workers took to the streets in all 9 provinces to demand, among other things, a basic income grant, a better minimum wage, and a cap on fuel prices and interest rates. They also want the ongoing problems with the state-owned supplier of electricity, Eskom, to be resolved so that businesses stop losing work due to power cuts. Azar Jamin, the chief economist at consultancy firm Econometrics, says the July inflation rate of 7.8% was expected.
The main causes, obviously, have been the steep increase in fuel prices at the beginning of July and the continuing rise in food prices as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the halting of food exports from the latter until recently, which pushed up food commodity prices globally.
Jamin says the $88 basic income grant demanded by the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, and the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, is unrealistic.
It's a path to total catastrophe in a very short space of time. If we were to succumb to the kind of basic income grant that they're looking for, which would cost 400 billion rand extra per year, let us rather just live with the kind of social grants that we already have, which are more magnanimous and widespread than is the case with most other countries.
Economist Lebohang Peko, a senior research fellow at the Trade Collective Research Group, disagrees.
My question is, can we afford not to? I think the notion of a basic income which is able to deal with things like hunger at household level and at childhood level, which has other impacts like stunting, like cognitive functioning at a very crucial developmental age, is quite important.
But can the protests force the government's hand?
I do think that what these sorts of protests do is they are a challenge to the state. They are a reminder, a postcard from the very poor and from the very angry of what is happening on the ground. And what you do when you receive something in the mail, you do well to read it.
Jamin, meanwhile, is optimistic. Prices will improve soon.
Given the fact that fuel prices came down sharply in August, and are likely to fall further in September. And given that Ukraine has now started shipping food back abroad, exporting to Middle East and other countries, food prices could also start coming down.
Ironically, COSATU, which initially called for the protests, is an alliance partner with the ruling African National Congress Party, which has been in power since 1994. Vicky Stark for VOA News, Cape Town, South Africa.
Vote counting is underway in Angola following Wednesday's parliamentary and presidential election. The two leading parties are the ruling Popular Front for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, led by President João Lourenço, and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, led by Adalberto Costa Jr. Myra Fernandes of VOA's Portuguese service is in Rwanda covering the vote. She tells me voting went well on Wednesday despite minor glitches.
A lot of people went to the polling stations very early. The polling stations opened at 7 a.m., but we talked with people that were queuing since 5 a.m. for several reasons. They had to report back to work. They didn't want to be on a long line for too long. Some had to wait a little longer. So there was some insatisfaction towards that. But it went smoothly at the polling stations where we went. The people that we talked with, they said that everything went well.
How would you describe the enthusiasm among the voters you talked to, and what are some of the things that motivated them?
You know, one interesting thing about everyone that we talked with, it didn't really matter the age group, was the sense of being able to contribute for the country development, for the change, for the good things that they want to see happening in the country.
Myra, were there any major complaints from voters? For example, did the voters find their voting places and on time?
Some people had the surprise of being dislocated. How can I put this? They thought they would vote in a specific location, and when they got there, they were told that, no, you don't belong here, you have to go somewhere else. But there are not major incidents. We also had complaints from civil society movements saying that some of their people that were doing the inquiries outside the polling stations were detained. Some journalists actually asked the spokesperson for the Electoral National Commission, and he said that he had no knowledge of that.
So, Myra, when does the Election Commission hope to release some preliminary results?
The law here says that the final results need to be released up to 15 days. It can be sooner, but it cannot be later than that. The spokesperson was explaining that because the system here, they have to get all the reports from all the 18 provinces plus the countries where Angolans could vote this year, don't really have a date to release any kind of preliminary results. The normal thing that usually happens is 3 days. So let's see how it goes this year.
Myra, thank you so much for talking with us during this week. We do appreciate it.
You are most welcome. It's my pleasure.
That's Myra Fernandez of VOA's Portuguese service in Rwanda, covering Wednesday's elections. Tigrarian forces say Ethiopia's federal allies have launched an offensive against their southern position in violation of a month-long ceasefire. But Ethiopia's government blamed Tigrarian rebels for the flare-up in violence. Officials told VOA Tuesday they are ready for peace talks mediated by the African Union. Henry Wilkins has more from Gambela, Ethiopia.
The Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, known as the TPLF, said Wednesday that troops from the National Defense Force and Amhara Regional Forces attacked its positions near Kobo in the Amhara region of Ethiopia. The report was later confirmed by the Reuters news agency. A statement from the TPLF command said Tigray's army is reliably ready to repulse this offensive and transition into a counter-offensive to liberate occupied sovereign Tigrayan territory and return our displaced people to their homes. The statement appeared to suggest the TPLF could respond with force. The Ethiopian government has since alleged that it was the TPLF which launched the attacks. A statement from the federal government called on the international community for support. The international community should also condemn the obvious belligerence of the TPLF, lest it become complicit in the unconscionable march of the TPLF to a third round of conflict. All those who profess to be committed to the stability of the region and humanitarian ideals should exert pressure on the TPLF to renounce violence and endorse peace, the statement said. The Ethiopian government says it has been laying the groundwork for peace talks with the TPLF, mediated by the African Union. On Tuesday, an Ethiopian government spokesperson, Selamawit Kassa, spoke to VOA.
The federal government has full confidence on the African Union and its High Commission assigned to accommodate the peace talks. There is no plausible reason for Ethiopia to look for other entities to broker the peace efforts.
The TPLF, however, claims the AU is biased in favour of the federal government and will not come to the negotiating table without mediation by the Kenyan government and a resumption of basic services to the region, such as banking and humanitarian access, which have been blocked by officials in Addis Ababa. Getachew Reda, a TPLF spokesperson, criticised the government for favouring AU mediation on Monday in an op-ed published on the website of the Africa Report, a monthly news magazine. Ahmed Soliman is with UK-based research group Chatham House.
It's been very evident that both sides have been recuperating and preparing themselves for a renewed bout of fighting at the same time as talking about peace. And as we see today, as happened at the beginning of the war in November 2020, both sides have blamed the other for instigating the conflict. Really, this relapse into fighting in Tigray and northern Ethiopia should have been avoided at all costs.
William Davidson is an analyst for the International Crisis Group, a research organisation based in Belgium. He says all sides to the conflict need to talk with each other.
So this is a clear indicator that delay in talks has fed into this very volatile truce, and we see events that could mean a resumption of conflict. And I think there's an evident an urgent need for the external actors here, the African Union, Kenya's government, the US, etc., to try and get the parties not just to pause these latest hostilities, but also to actually sit round the table for talks where they can discuss all of their disagreements rather than making them preconditions for talks.
A humanitarian truce that was established in March between the two sides now appears to be at an end. Renewed fighting is likely to have a major impact on the humanitarian situation in Tigray. Humanitarian organisations say parts of the region could already be in a state of famine. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said Wednesday he is shocked and saddened by the renewed fighting and that Ethiopians have suffered enough. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Gambela, Ethiopia.
You're listening to Daybreak Africa on the Voice of America. I'm James Butty in Washington. Today is Thursday, August 25th. The government of Malawi has ordered refugees who are staying outside of their designated areas to return to a refugee camp within 90 days. The move comes after a High Court judge vacated an injunction that restrained the government from returning refugees and asylum seekers to the camp. However, the UN Refugee Agency says the move would create serious resource problems at the country's only camp. Lamek Masina reports from Blantyre.
The government says about 2,000 refugees who are living among the communities outside the Dzaleka refugee camp pose a danger to national security. It also says by living outside their designated areas, they are violating the country's encampment policy, which prohibits refugees from working or doing business outside the camp. Rehema Miro is Durable Solutions Officer at the United Nations High Commission for the Refugees in Malawi. She told VOA that the directive to have the refugees return to camp is worrisome.
The issue is mostly because Dzaleka refugee camp is heavily congested, and relocating the rural and urban refugees to this camp has their consequences. And this is mostly related to the access to the basic needs because of the increase in population. And also it makes the residents there prone to the non-communicable diseases, for example, COVID-19, and of course the recent cholera that is ongoing within Malawi.
Initially, Dzaleka was meant to accommodate 10,000 people, but Miro says the place is now a home to about 55,000 refugees and asylum seekers, mainly from Burundi, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ethiopia. To address the congestion, the government has allowed the reopening of the Rwanda refugees camp to accommodate the returnees. But Miro says a lot of work needs to be done to improve the facility, which previously accommodated refugees who fled conflict in Mozambique.
UNHCR just wants to raise the concern that the time frame given